My father, in a practice known as snatching a groom from the honor rolls, arranged for the third-ranked imperial scholar, Alaric to marry me. At the time, I didn't know he already had someone he loved. Later, my father was framed and imprisoned, sentenced to exile in the southern province of Lingnan. My husband brought back his childhood sweetheart, who had recently divorced, and said he would take her as a wife of equal standing. My mother-in-law admonished me. "You've been barren for 3 years since you married in. Can you not allow my son to marry another?" Alaric sneered at me. "You've lost your backing now. Stop making a scene." He didn't know. I still had the letter of release he had written in a fit of anger years ago. In 7 days, I would be leaving with my father for Lingnan. On the day my father was imprisoned, Alaric brought his newly divorced childhood sweetheart home. He came to my courtyard and informed me, his tone neither warm nor cold. "In 7 days, I will marry Lillian as a wife of equal standing. I have already failed her too much. No matter how unwilling you are, you must endure it for now." My father had only just been jailed. He couldn't even wait a single day. I looked up at him. His gaze was as cold as unmelted ice in early spring. Not a trace of affection could be seen. After 3 years of marriage, I had still failed to move his heart. I hastily turned my head away to hide my sorrow. All right, it didn't matter. I was leaving soon anyway. I couldn't care less who he brought into this manor. Alaric seemed a little surprised. His lips moved, but he said nothing. He had always been a man of few words with me. After he left, I opened my jewelry box and retrieved a piece of paper hidden beneath my accessories. It was the letter of release Alaric had written for me 3 years ago. It bore his signature and his thumbprint. All I had to do was submit it to the authorities, and we would be free of each other. 3 years ago, at the celebratory banquet for the new scholars, I fell in love with the third-ranked scholar, Alaric at first sight. Within 3 days, he had sent a matchmaker to my home to propose. I thought it was a match made in heaven, until the news of Lillian Song's marriage reached the capital. That day, Alaric drank himself into a stupor. I brewed him a sobering soup and brought it to his study. He was slumped over his desk, his eyes red, calling my name. Eleanor Pay. Thinking he needed me, I hurried forward, but he snatched up an inkstone and hurled it to the floor. The ceramic inkstone landed heavily by the hem of my skirt. Shards of porcelain scattered. My heart skipped a beat in shock. The usually gentle Alaric gritted his teeth. "Eleanor Pay, this is all your fault. If you hadn't taken a fancy to me, if you didn't have a father who was the minister of personnel, how could I have been forced to marry you? How could I have watched as Lillian married another man?" His voice was filled with a towering hatred. So, it turned out that the harmonious life I thought we had was just a dream of my own making. A knot formed in my chest, suffocating me. I couldn't help but cry. Alaric staggered to his feet, took up a brush, and hastily wrote a letter of release. He signed it, pressed his thumbprint, and then flung the flimsy piece of paper at me. He said, "I want to divorce you and bring Lillian back." He was deeply drunk to be saying such things. I suppressed my emotions and said with a choked voice, "You are drunk. Let's talk about this when you are sober." I bent down, picked up the paper, turned, and left, closing the door behind me. Tears flowed like a bursting river down my cheeks. I returned to my courtyard alone. The night wind was cold, but it couldn't clear my head. The next day, Alaric was sober and treated me with his usual gentle courtesy. He didn't mention Lillian again, nor did he mention a divorce. I tucked the paper away at the very bottom of my jewelry box, deceiving myself. His beloved had already married another. He and I had a long future ahead of us. Lillian's marriage had been an unhappy one. 2 months ago, Alaric personally wrote a letter to the magistrate of her county, helping her secure a divorce. Pitying her for being alone and destitute, he brought her to the capital and found her a place to live. And now, he was going to welcome her into his home as a wife of equal standing. When Alaric brought Lillian to see me, I was taking inventory of my dowry. I had brought 80 chests of dowry when I married him. Now, I had to account for every item, convert them into cash, and use the money to bribe the jailers. Alaric stepped through the door. I put away my ledger and stood up. He said, "Lillian wants to live in this courtyard. You should move out." His voice was cold and decisive, leaving no room for discussion. This courtyard was the closest to his own quarters. It was filled with blooming flowers, including the crabapple tree he had planted with his own hands. Under the wisteria trellis was the swing he had built for me when we were newlyweds. Lillian stood behind him, peeking out timidly, her almond eyes filled with envy. I looked up, refusing him for the first time. "Number, the manor is large enough. It is not as if there is no other place for her. Why must it be here?" She tugged on his sleeve, a hint of displeasure on her face. Alaric's expression darkened. "Because Lillian likes it. Because the crabapple blossoms here were originally planted for her." So this place had been intended for Lillian all along. Lillian curved her lips into a gentle smile, like a hanging crabapple blossom growing by the old brick walls. I stared at her. Alaric moved to shield her, his tone icy. "You will move out today. Be good. Don't make this difficult for everyone." I lowered my lashes and said softly, "All right." My father was in prison. My greatest support was gone. Alaric no longer had to treat me with polite deference. By dusk, I had moved into a small, remote courtyard. Then I took out the jewelry Alaric had given me and sold it at the treasure pavilion. I had once spent lavishly here. The proprietor saw me and immediately led me to a private room with a smile. I laid the items out on the table, one by one. The first was a pair of gold hairpins, a gift from Alaric when he had proposed. He had just passed the exams then, with nothing to his name, and had used all he had to craft these small, exquisite pins for me. The second was a jade bracelet he had bought with his salary after being promoted. The third was a dangling hairpin, an apology gift after his drunken outburst. I loved to wear it when I ran to him. The beads would jingle, and he would smile and hold me, saying I was always so free-spirited, so unlike the other demure ladies. The proprietress's eyes widened. "These look like what Lord She bought here several years ago. Are you sure you want to sell them, madam?" I said, "I am sure." She examined the pieces carefully and finally handed me a banknote. I didn't bargain. I took the note and walked out. It was bustling outside. I heard Alaric's voice laced with a doting smile. "Do you like this hairpin?" Lillian replied shyly, "I do." Without hesitation, Alaric bought it for her. As he was paying, he looked up and saw me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He instinctively glanced at my wrist. The jade bracelet I never used to take off was gone. Alaric put down his money, grabbed my wrist, and stared into my eyes. "Eleanor, where is your bracelet?" I turned my head away, avoiding his gaze, and lied without thinking. "I am not wearing it." He was displeased, his grip tightening until I winced in pain. Lillian hastily tugged on his sleeve. "Alaric." He seemed to snap out of it and let go. He smiled at her as if nothing had happened. I was out of line just now. Under the curious gazes of the crowd, I left alone. 2 days before I was set to leave, my mother-in-law summoned me and told me to start preparing for Alaric and Lillian's wedding. I had other things to do, so I politely declined. Her previously amiable expression vanished. She scolded me, "You've been barren for 3 years since you married in. Can you not allow my son to marry another?" I bowed my head and replied, "Of course he is allowed. It is just that I am occupied with other matters recently and have no spare time." Alaric had never asked for my permission to take a second wife. Why should I be the one to prepare for it? I didn't bother to argue, simply deflecting her with a placid response. On the way back to my courtyard, I ran into Alaric again. He was dressed in a moon-white robe, his features clear and handsome, accompanying Lillian as she brewed tea in the backyard. She wore a red agate and pearl hairpin, smiling as she poured tea for him. As she bent over, the hairpin remained still. The steaming tea filled the small cups, and their gazes met and lingered in the rising mist. He was a young official and often used the excuse of work to spend entire days in his study. He had never done this with me. My steps faltered, but I didn't stop, practically fleeing back to my courtyard. My mind was in turmoil. I couldn't even focus on my account books. A single glance in my youth had trapped me for 3 long years. Only today did I see clearly. Alaric's affection for me was false. His love for Lillian was real. I stared blankly at my ledger. Until my maid, Willow, brought the inventory of my dowry. "Madam, it is all checked. Aside from what was sold to help the master. A few items are missing." I looked up sharply. "Which ones?" My parents had given me so much, I couldn't remember everything, she said. A pair of red agate and pearl hairpins, a kingfisher feather phoenix coronet. Red agate and pearl hairpins. I had seen them on Lillian's head. I stormed into Lillian's courtyard. She was in front of a polished bronze mirror, trying on the phoenix coronet. Her wedding to Alaric was in 6 days. It was a rushed affair. I had thought Alaric had long intended to marry her and had prepared everything in advance. I never imagined she would go into my storeroom and take the coronet my mother had given me. My liver ached with anger. I reached out and snatched the coronet from her head. I pulled out the intricate hairpins one by one and threw them on the floor. Some were tangled in her long hair, but I pulled them out forcefully. She hissed in pain, her hair a mess, forced to look up and beg, "Please, let go first. I'll take it off myself." I clutched my coronet and stared at her coldly. Lillian stumbled from her chair, her hair disheveled. A few strands had been pulled out and lay on the floor. She looked utterly wretched, her eyes filled with tears. "Madam, you only had to say the word and I would have taken it off. Why did you have to do this?" My face was a cold mask. I kicked her lightly with the toe of my shoe. "You took my things without asking, and you ask me why." She buried her face and just wept, like a pear blossom in the rain. Suddenly, footsteps sounded behind me. Alaric strode in, pushed me aside, and gathered Lillian into his arms. I staggered back, instinctively grabbing the dressing table to steady myself. The coronet slipped from my grasp and fell to the floor with a heavy thud. The red gemstone on it had a faint crack. He looked at me with a gaze full of loathing, as if he had never known me. "Eleanor, why must you make things so difficult for her?" A torrent of grievances was stuck in my throat. In the end, all I could manage was a choked. "She took what my mother left for me." His voice turned cold. "It is just a headpiece. What is the harm in letting her wear it for a few days? You would rather break it than lend it to Lillian. You've lost your backing now. Stop making a scene." I stood there frozen. It was already spring, yet I felt a bone-deep chill. Alaric knew just how to hurt me. The gemstone on the coronet was cracked. Lillian, nestled in Alaric's embrace, frowned. She didn't like it anymore. He soothed her in a low voice. "I'll have another one made for you. I'll make sure it is ready in time for the wedding." I bent down, picked up the broken coronet, and walked out alone. My heart felt like it was being squeezed, the pain making it hard to breathe. Just a few more days. Once everything is settled, I will leave. I converted most of my dowry into banknotes and saved them carefully. Alaric ignored me for a full day before he came to find me. He told me my father had been demoted and would be leaving for his new post in Lingnan in 3 days. My mother would go with him. As a married daughter, I could stay in the capital and continue to be an official's wife. Alaric leaned against the doorframe, silhouetted against the light. His handsome face was cast in shadow. "Eleanor, if you hadn't married me, you would be on your way to that wretched, disease-ridden place right now." I didn't comment. If I hadn't fallen for him at first sight, I could have married into the royal family. I would have lived a life of peace and comfort without all this grief. Seeing my silence, he took a bracelet from his sleeve and placed it heavily on my dressing table. "You lied to me. You sold it." He spat out the word "lied" with heavy emphasis, as if deeply displeased. I said softly, "I didn't want it anymore, so I sold it." "Is that so hard to understand?" His brows furrowed with anger. "The steward told me you've also been selling parts of your dowry." He stared at me, his gaze so intense it felt like it could burn a hole through me. "You don't wear jewelry anymore, and you don't socialize. What are you doing with so much money?" I met his gaze and said frankly, "My father has been demoted. The journey to Lingnan is long and there are many expenses along the way." It was the truth. Alaric had no reason to doubt it. He then threw the items I had sold a few days ago onto my dressing table, one by one. The jewels clattered together, his eyes were menacing. "You sold everything I gave you. Eleanor, are you throwing a tantrum with me?" I lowered my head, silently arranging the beads on the dangling hairpin before placing it in my jewelry box. "I'll take it to Lingnan and sell it there." His reach wouldn't extend that far. Click, the box was locked. I said softly, "Number." I wasn't throwing a tantrum. It is just that now. I no longer needed anything from him. Alaric's voice was cold and sarcastic. My wife should have been Lillian. You have no right to be jealous of her. I just replied numbly, I know. His wife should have been Lillian. He and Lillian were the true lovers. I had heard this many times. I didn't need him to repeat it. He said nothing more, and a brief silence fell. I continued with what I was doing, undoing my elaborate hairstyle and braiding my hair myself. When I got to Lingnan, there would be no maids to help me. Perhaps seeing my compliance today, Alaric's tone softened. You can have a maid do that. I forced a smile and replied perfunctorily, all right. There were only 2 days left until Alaric and Lillian's wedding. Large red lanterns were hung from the eaves. Even in my remote courtyard, I could see them from my window. The lanterns were connected by red silk ribbons on which was written in Alaric's hand. May our love last 1,000 years. May we live in harmony for 100. May we be like a pair of swans, never to be parted for a century. There was none of this when he married me 3 years ago. I stared out the window. Lillian appeared at the end of the long corridor. She was very happy today. Her eyes curved into crescents, her steps light as she walked towards me. The hem of her red dress was like a swimming koi. She stopped at my door and called to me softly. Sister Eleanor, what kind of hairstyle do you think I should wear for the wedding? She was wearing her newly tailored wedding gown, but her hair was down like an unmarried maiden. I said, this isn't your first wedding. Do you need to ask me about such a small thing? Her expression froze, her face paling. Her lips moved, but she seemed unable to speak. Alaric appeared from around the corner. His gaze was sharp as he spoke up for her. Eleanor, you are a woman, too. Why must you provoke her with her past? Lillian only wanted to mend things with you, which is why she asked me if she could come and ask you in person. And was she not here to provoke me? Alaric couldn't see it. His eyes were only for her. I stood in the doorway, looking down at her. Wear your hair as you did for your first wedding. There, I've told you, you can go back now. Her eyes reddened, and she stumbled back a few steps, falling weakly into his arms. He frowned and threatened me. Eleanor, you have already committed one of the 7 grounds for divorce. I could easily cast you aside with a single letter. I looked at his face, a bitter taste in my mouth. I forced a smile, which quickly turned into tearful laughter. You don't have to. Alaric, I already have the letter of release. He sneered. I don't have to. If it weren't for the upcoming celebration, I would write it for you right now. He had grown accustomed to speaking to me harshly. The words came so easily to him now. I leaned against the doorframe, silent. I watched him leave with Lillian. She snuggled against him, smiling up at him. The lanterns hanging in the corridor cast a red glow on their faces. A picture of perfect love. I took a deep breath, and once I had calmed down, I said to the maid beside me, prepare the carriage. Tomorrow, I am going to the Ministry of Rights. I went back into my room. I took the letter of release from my jewelry box. I picked up a brush and signed my name. I pressed my thumbprint. All in one smooth motion. The divorce proceedings were straightforward. With both our signatures and thumbprints, and with my family's recent fall from grace, it seemed only natural that Alaric would want to sever ties with me. The officials at the Ministry of Rights asked few questions. I had my household registration transferred back to the Pei family. By the time I returned to the manor, it was nearly noon. The wedding was tomorrow. The entire household was in a flurry of activity. No one paid me any mind. I returned to my room and packed what I needed to take with me. 2 rosewood chests of belongings. I had someone send them out of the manor ahead of time. The banknotes were thin and could be carried on my person. I had sent a message to my parents. We could leave first thing in the morning. My room had been cleared out, with no trace of my existence left behind. At nightfall, a maid from Alaric's side brought me a magnificent gown. She bowed her head. The master asked me to bring this for you, madam. He personally selected the fabric 2 months ago. You can wear it to the ceremony tomorrow. The fabric was of the finest silk shimmering in the reddish candlelight. My maid took it, but the other maid did not leave. She stood at the foot of the steps. The master also asked me to give you a message, madam. What he said yesterday was in anger. He asks that you not take it to heart. His words were like spilled water, impossible to take back. The sting remained. I paused, then just nodded to show I had heard. She cautiously looked up and asked in a low voice, "Is there anything you would like to say to the master, madam?" The night wind was cold. It made my eyes feel dry. I said slowly, "There is nothing more. You should go back and report to him." She quickly withdrew. That night I slept poorly. Servants came and went outside my door. The lanterns burned all night. Alaric was getting married. The servants would receive a large bonus. Everyone was happy working day and night without fatigue. I woke early. At the first light of dawn, I changed into a plain, inconspicuous dress and put on a veiled hat. The steward still recognized me and asked casually, "Madam Pei, where are you going so early? The wedding is in an hour." Lillian would be a madam too now. To distinguish between us, he used my family name. I just smiled. "To the city gates to see my parents off. Don't tell the master." He bowed his head. "Yes." I got into the carriage and headed for the city gates. The carriage rumbled forward. The guests heading to the Shy Manor were going in the opposite direction. I lowered the curtain and stared at my feet. 3 years ago, Alaric and I were married. We had a period of polite, if distant, coexistence. I was naive then. I thought, with Lillian married and him married to me, this was how things would be. I thought if I was good to him, I could win his heart. Until a year ago when he received another letter from Lillian. After marrying me, he had risen through the ranks of officialdom with astonishing speed. I loved him, and my father supported him. His life was smooth, his future bright. He was even more successful than when he had first passed the exams. But Lillian's marriage was not a happy one. Her husband doted on his concubines and neglected her. At 19, she was worn out and growing thin. She couldn't help but pour out her sorrows to her childhood sweetheart. The ink on the letter was nearly blurred by her tears. She was supposed to have married Alaric. They were supposed to have been childhood sweethearts. Alaric felt guilty towards her and resentful towards me. From then on, he began to secretly support her financially and distance himself from me. I think I woke up too late. An hour later, I was in a carriage heading to Lingnan. My parents knew I had divorced Alaric. They just sighed. Sighed that they had misjudged him, that they had let me suffer for so long. I pressed my lips together, not daring to speak. It was my own foolishness. One mistake after another. The road to Lingnan was long. But I had money. I could rent a larger boat for the river journey, bribe officials along the way, and hire fast horses from the post stations. We arrived at our new official residence in Lingnan over half a month later. I had thought I wouldn't be able to adjust, but after a few days of illness from the change in climate, I adapted. My mother planted melons, fruits, and vegetables in the courtyard. The climate here was hot and humid, and everything grew quickly. My father's salary was much lower. I saved the money I had brought for emergencies. Then I learned to weave and sew from my mother. There was no soft silk here, no sparkling jewelry. But I was free and happy. I could eat fruits that didn't grow in the capital and see landscapes I had never seen before. Feasting on 300 lychees a day. I wouldn't mind being a southerner forever. I gradually forgot my old life, forgot how I felt when I was with Alaric, the days of polite distance, the rare moments of affection, the long nights of being neglected, waiting by a lonely lamp. They flowed away like water. A life like a dream, leaving no trace. After returning from a wedding for the son of one of my father's colleagues, my mother took my hand and asked with a frown, "I saw you were distracted just now. Were you thinking of him again?" I was taken aback, then answered honestly, "I was thinking about how they made the boiled chicken. It was different from how you make it." She burst out laughing. "I'll have your father ask for the recipe tomorrow." I hugged her arm, acting cute. My laughter was bright and clear. Before the wedding began, Alaric paused for a moment outside Eleanor's door. He wanted to say that his words about divorce were said in anger. He didn't mean them. He just wanted to tell her that now, he was all she had. He didn't know when he had gotten into the habit of speaking to her so harshly. Alaric was starting to regret it. Regretting his cruel words, regretting always hurting her. There was no sound from the room. He asked the steward, "Where is the madam?" The steward, thinking he was asking about Lillian, replied, "The madam is getting ready." He said, "Good." Yesterday, Alaric had sent a new set of clothes to Eleanor. He had chosen the fabric and had it made 2 months ago. Whenever he saw something beautiful, he wanted to give it to her. The lake blue color suited her. He imagined how she would look in it and smiled to himself. But by the time the wedding began, he still hadn't seen her. His eyelid twitched. He asked the steward again, "Where is the madam?" The steward bowed his head in fear. "Are you referring to Madame Pay? She left this morning to see Lord Pay off at the city gates." The auspicious hour had arrived. Alaric ignored Lillian, who was standing behind him. He ran to the other courtyard and threw the door open. The room was completely empty, as if Eleanor had never lived there. Only the new lake blue gown was left behind, untouched. Alaric's heart felt empty. It was followed by a sharp, stabbing pain. He was going to lose her. He ran to the stables, took a fast horse, and charged out the gate, ignoring the surprised looks of the guests. Lillian, in her wedding dress, ran after him, stumbling, her eyes filled with tears. "Alaric, don't leave me again." A wind roared in his ears. He didn't hear her. She tripped on the threshold and was helped back by her maids, her face a mask of unwillingness. Alaric, in his wedding robes, whipped the horse, chasing desperately. The wind reddened his eyes. He watched as a simple carriage left the city gates. He tried to follow, but he was stopped. He was a capital official. He could not leave without a decree. He watched as the carriage grew smaller and smaller, disappearing from his sight. His strength left him, and he fell from his horse. Lingnan was 1,000 miles from the capital. From now on, they might never see each other again. He covered his face with his hands. Tears seeped through his fingers. His sobs were filled with a terrible pain. Everyone was stunned. The gatekeeper rushed to help him up. "Lord-She, what has happened?" He couldn't speak. Behind him, over the She Manor, the fireworks that had been prepared a day in advance exploded in the clear blue sky. This was supposed to be his wedding day, but Eleanor was gone. He couldn't think of anything else. So Lillian was just a youthful obsession he couldn't have. He had always thought he had been forced by power to marry Eleanor. He had always thought he should hate her, distance himself from her, and compensate Lillian. But living with her day after day, he didn't dare admit that he had ever been moved. Only today did Alaric see clearly. Losing Eleanor was the true, heart-wrenching pain. "I had thought I would stay in Lingnan for a long time. But 2 years later, my uncle managed to get my father reinstated. My uncle wrote to him advising him. His name had not been fully cleared. It was only because of his past achievements and his reputation for being a diligent and caring official in Lingnan that the emperor had summoned him back. In the future, he had to be careful and hold his tongue. It wasn't just my uncle who had helped. Alaric had also played a part. When my father mentioned Alaric, his expression was placid, his brow unmoved. To my father, Alaric was not just a former son-in-law, but also a student. It seemed only natural that he would be concerned with my father's case. In the spring, I returned to the capital with my parents. We couldn't live in our old official residence. My father took us to an old house in the suburbs. When Alaric came to find me, the first spring rain was falling. He stood at the gate with an oil paper umbrella. The rain was fine and dense, a curtain between us. Like a layer of mist. I remembered the first time I saw him. He stood in a crowd, tall and elegant, like jade shrouded in mist. But he had aged now and grown thinner. His temperament had settled, as calm as an old well. When I saw him, my heart no longer beat as fast as it used to. I stood under the eaves, my hands tucked into my sleeves, and asked with my head bowed, "Lord-She, what brings you here?" His voice was hoarse. "Eleanor, I never wanted to divorce you. Those were just words said in anger. I was angry that you sold what I gave you." I looked into his eyes and said softly, "Alaric, you have said such angry words twice. The first time, I deceived myself and hid the letter of release. The second time, I finally made up my mind and left him." A look of surprise and confusion crossed his face. He didn't seem to remember. After all, he had been drunk, and it had been 5 years. I calmly recounted, "5 years ago, you were drunk. You said it was all my fault, that I made you watch as Lillian married another. That was when you wrote the letter of release. 2 years ago, I used that letter to divorce you. We have no connection now. If you are here to discuss matters with my father, I can pass on a message." His face turned deathly pale. His lips moved, and he managed to force out a few words, his voice very quiet. "I came to find you, Eleanor." "Then there is nothing more to say." I stepped back and closed the door, shutting everything out. The servant said that Alaric did not leave. He stood there all night until Lillian came to find him. On my third day back in the capital, it was the flower festival. I went out with the wives and daughters of my father's colleagues for a spring outing. Lillian was there. She didn't look happy. She wore plain jewelry and sat alone to the side. No one spoke to her. Alaric had brought her back with great fanfare, and many people knew her story. She had been involved with a married man. Her past was no secret. Most people disliked her, making sarcastic remarks, saying she had driven me away. At gatherings like this, she could only sit in a corner suffering their cold shoulders. I paid her no mind, focusing on cutting the colorful paper in my hands. Mrs. Yi whispered in my ear. She went from being the wife of a minor county clerk to the wife of a high-ranking official. What more could she want? I thought for a moment. Perhaps that is not what she wanted. I handed Mrs. Yi a small pair of silver scissors. She sat down and joined me in cutting the paper. Then we pasted the colored paper onto the branches of the flowers to worship the flower goddess and pray for a bountiful bloom. Mrs. Yi couldn't sit still. She only cut for a short while before going off to chase butterflies. Lillian walked over to me. Her voice was soft but heavy with resentment. "Eleanor, this is all your fault." I was a little confused. Oh, it is my fault again. Though I was still young and my back was strong, I couldn't carry this many burdens. She said, "If you hadn't insisted on marrying Alaric, I could have married him 5 years ago. I wouldn't have had to suffer so much. And his heart wouldn't be with someone else. We wouldn't have reached the point where we can't stand the sight of each other." I rubbed my forehead. My head was starting to ache. "Then why don't you blame him?" She froze. I said, "He is the kind of person who would have married someone else even if he didn't marry me. He was only 22 when he became a 5th-rank official. That is a position many people strive for their entire lives and never reach. The top-ranked scholar from his year is still a rank below him. If he had wanted to marry you, no one could have stopped him. But he couldn't give all of this up. You should be glad he married me. I am an easy target. If it had been someone else, they would have dealt with both of you the first time you wrote him a letter." Actually, when Alaric had helped her get a divorce, I had been happy for her. Happy that she had escaped a bad situation. But then I grew to dislike her. She was just like I used to be, unable to see things clearly. I finished speaking slowly, dropped the scissors, and prepared to leave. Her eyes reddened. She stood alone outside the flower bushes, tears streaming down her face. I had a wonderful time. When I returned home at dusk, my mother told me that several matchmakers had come to propose marriage. I said, "I don't want to marry again. I had been through it once. There was nothing good about marriage. It only brought more trouble. You had to manage the household, support your husband, and worry about children. And if you chose the wrong person, you had to endure a great deal of suffering. Being alone was much more peaceful and free." My mother respected my decision and turned them all away. I stayed at home helping my mother with chores and occasionally went on outings with friends. Life was good. Alaric often sent me gifts. Sometimes they were rare trinkets. Sometimes they were long, emotional letters. I returned them all, unopened. On an ordinary night, Lillian came to find me. She had grown thin and haggard. The wind was cold outside, but I let her in. She cried and apologized to me. "I was so wrong before. It was I who wronged you." I looked at her calmly and handed her a handkerchief to dry her tears. She said that Alaric just supported her financially but rarely saw her. She was alone in the manor with no one to talk to and felt depressed every day. Years ago, it was he who had broken his promise to marry her. Now, it was he who was neglecting her. She sobbed, "I hate him." I listened, my chin in my hand, not knowing what to make of their love and hate. As long as she didn't hate me, Lillian seemed to have not spoken to anyone in a long time. She talked for a long time until I was drowsy. Finally, she asked, "Can you forgive me? It was I who competed with you, who took your things, who made you sad. I know I was wrong." I thought for a moment and said, "All right. When you've repaired my phoenix coronet, I will forgive you." 6 months later, Lillian returned my coronet. The cracked red gemstone had been replaced with a better one. She had glued on the tiny seed pearls herself, one by one. All the scratches were gone. It was good. At least for the 6 months she spent repairing it, she hadn't been bored, hadn't been constantly thinking about whether Alaric loved her or not. During this time, two major events occurred. First, my father's name was cleared, and he was reinstated to his original post. Second, Alaric was convicted in a political struggle and exiled to Lingnan. I was not surprised. He had risen through the ranks too quickly, too smoothly. He was still a bit naive, lacking in caution and prone to stumbling. Before he left, he came to see me again, just like at the beginning. I stood on the high steps of the minister's residence, looking down at him. He stood at the bottom, his posture restrained. He had to look up to see me. I am going to Lingnan. I may be there for many years. Does this count as atonement? His voice was hoarse. I didn't like to hear it. I said, number. You were careless and brought this upon yourself. It has nothing to do with me. I turned and left. Lillian was also going to Lingnan with him. She had no friends in the capital. I was the only one who saw her off. She sat in a simple carriage, lifted the curtain to look at me, the light in her eyes dim. I knew what she was worried about. Lingnan was rumored to be a place of disease and hardship. She didn't know if she would ever return. I said, "Don't worry. Lingnan is a good place. It is just a long journey, but you can spend more of Alaric's money, get a bigger carriage, and make yourself comfortable. There are many delicious fruits in Lingnan, many that you can't find in the capital." She curved her lips into a smile, gentle and bright. Just like the first time I saw her, another tear fell from the corner of her eye. "Thank you, Eleanor." I stayed in the capital studying and learning. I read many classics and also learned acupuncture and woodblock printing. My father did not remain in his post as minister forever. He later requested a provincial assignment. He took me with him to Linen and Jangling. I saw all the splendors of the world. I would never again be troubled by such small matters. Alaric also made some achievements in Lingnan, but he had no one in the court to speak for him. He was later transferred to many different places but never returned to the capital. The time he came to see me before he left the capital was the last time we ever met. A few years later, I received a letter from Lillian. After 10 years of marriage to Alaric, she had finally decided to divorce him. She was different from me. She had no backing and had to rely on him. 3 years ago, she had followed him to Chengdu for a new assignment. She was always clever and quickly learned to weave the local brocade. With a way to support herself, she could finally leave him. I thought, that was very good. There were still many years of life left. We could both live for ourselves again.